Reading journal articles can be difficult. There's a lot of jargon, odd phrasing, and assumptions about your knowledge, and the information is denser than the doom gloom we just had in San Diego. If you feel lost and distraught when you're trying to read papers, don't feel like you're alone. Even people who can read papers at lightning speed started out where you are now. I'm Madison Edwards, and today we're going to talk about how to ease your transition from a novice to an expert level journal reader. Exactly how academic articles will look varies from field to field. In general, they're broken up into sections that serve similar purposes. Let's break down the structure of a journal article piece by piece. Papers typically begin with an abstract. In fact, we have a whole video dedicated to abstracts, which you can find linked below in the description. Abstracts very briefly break down the why, how, and what of a work. Why are the authors interested in this project? How did they make progress on the topic? And what are the results of their work? This is an important paragraph that people can use to decide whether or not to read the whole article. When you read an abstract, you should be asking yourself if the work is relevant and interesting to you. Otherwise, you can save your time and maybe move on to a different paper. The next section is typically some kind of introduction. In introductions, authors introduce the topic, usually with lots of details about the current state of the field, what's known, and what is not known. This can naturally lead into their research question. Introductions can often be quite long and detailed. Keep in mind that some of the information might be more detailed than you need, and you can potentially skip these portions or scan through them. If you've spent a lot of time in this specific field and you feel you're an expert, a lot of the introduction might be a review or too basic for you. Focus on the information that's unfamiliar and that you need to understand in order to follow the rest of the paper. Next, we come to the results section, which is the star of the show in any paper. If a paper were a meal, the abstract would be an appetizer, the introduction a salad, and the results would be the main course. This is a section where the authors will show you exactly what their data is, and they will make the claims that you read about in the abstract. They'll walk you through the data piece by piece, describing what they did and what they feel it shows. But you should read this section with a critical eye. Authors will claim that their data demonstrates something, but it's up to you to determine whether or not you think this is true. There might be other factors that could have led them to obtain the results they report. Here, pay attention to error bars, sample sizes, controls, and conditions used. Are the conditions representative of the situation the authors are trying to recreate? Is the sample size large enough to make any claims about the population? What factors could not be controlled for? Can you think of an explanation for the observation other than what the authors claimed? Do you feel their claims are reasonable? Does it seem like the authors made assumptions or are exaggerating? When I first start tackling a results section, I like to start with the figures while looking at the text as little as possible. I try to understand what the experiments are while looking up any techniques that I'm unfamiliar with. What are the figures saying, and what conclusions would I draw from them? Does what I understand about the figures match what the authors are claiming? This is a great practice for interpreting data and critical thinking, and also helps you keep a skeptical eye on the data. The last major section is the discussion section, which is rich with content. This section summarizes many aspects of the paper, such as the results and the author's interpretation. It often describes how the authors feel they have contributed to their field, and they point out any future work that remains. Again, read this with a skeptical eye. Do you feel the authors have interpreted their results fairly? How do their results align with what is known in the field? How do they explain any contradictions in their data or unexpected results? Are you interested in pursuing any of the future questions? This is a great place to practice critical thinking by trying to come up with what you think might be the next most important questions in the field. Finally, The two most often overlooked sections of a paper are the methods and the supplemental information sections. In the methods sections, the authors will detail how they performed their experiments. This section can be very helpful if you're unfamiliar with a certain experiment or method. It can help you learn more about it. It's also a good place to look if you're trying to replicate the methods that the authors have used. If you're familiar with a certain experiment or method, you can analyze this section to make sure you agree with how the researchers set up their experiments and controls. Unfortunately, if you're trying to replicate these experiments, keep in mind this section may be brief and certain details left out. The supplemental information section may contain data that is not as high quality as what's in the main paper, data that doesn't support the author's data as well, or data that was not necessary to support the author's main claims. Finally, it may contain data that could not be included in the main paper due to length restrictions provided by the journal. Some general advice: write out the questions you need answered or the information you're looking for. This will help you know which sections of the paper to pay more attention to. Take notes in your own words that will help you remember the material better. Keep in mind, it's totally normal if you need to read through a paper more than once. I promise you'll understand it much better the second or third time. Oh look, a proline molecule. If you're like me, it's very easy to get distracted, especially if you're reading a paper. For this, I suggest taking breaks. If possible, read each paper section by section, taking a break after the abstract, after the introduction, after the results, and so on. Another piece of advice I have is put your phone away, hide your email browser, and try to avoid looking at distractions for segments of 20 to 30 minutes. After those 20 to 30 minutes, take a break. Go walk around, check your phone, grab a snack. This will help you to really absorb the content when you are focused on the paper. You may also, in your notes, want to look up terms that are unfamiliar to you or mark out abbreviations in case you forget while reading the paper. Reading academic articles is a skill just like any other. I've tried to break down the process here to make things easier, but ultimately it takes a lot of practice to become more skilled in reading research articles. The more you practice, especially in your field, the better you'll become, and hopefully it'll even become enjoyable.